Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We're gonna be looking into Psalm 144 today. It's from the New Living Translation. We're using U version for that,
Yeah.
and we really want to take a look at this psalm from, just the personal expressions of reliance that are in there,
Right.
but then also how that kind of moves into like this much broader visions of security and blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're gonna try to unpack that for you today, and hopefully give you a better understanding of the themes that are going on in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. It starts out very much from the personal and then it goes into the communal. There's a lot going on in this very short psalm.
Yeah, so let's just jump right in.
Yeah.
Okay, so the speaker starts by calling God his rock
Right.
and his fortress, which, that's pretty strong.
Yeah.
That's a very strong foundation to be building upon. But then comes this really interesting image. He says that God trains my hands for war and gives my fingers skill for battle.
Yeah. That's pretty striking imagery.
It is. It's very striking. It's kind of like, what do you think about that? Like, we've got this divine support, but then also very practical action.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating because on one level, you've got the idea that God is going to protect you. He's your fortress. He's your rock.
Right.
But then there's also this thing of, well, you also need to be equipped to deal with certain situations.
Yeah.
And so even our capabilities, even in war, in conflict,
Yeah.
are seen as gifts or empowerments from God. It's not just about God stepping in and doing it for us. It's about God equipping us for the things that we need to do in life.
Right. And then just a few verses later in verses 3 and 4, we get this big shift. It's talking about humanity now, and he says that we're like a breath of air.
Right,
Our
yes.
days are like a passing shadow. So now we've gone from this warrior imagery to this idea that, we're pretty insignificant.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Like, why that sudden shift?
Well, I think it really highlights this sense of humility before God.
Yeah.
Despite all our strength, all our skill that we might have, we are still just fleeting creatures compared to the eternal God. And I think it really underscores our dependence on him, even in the midst of sometimes when we think we're very capable.
Yeah, for sure. And that dependence kind of, I guess it fuels the plea that he gives in verses 5 through 7.
Right.
He's calling on God. He wants God to act, and he's not holding back. He's talking about opening the heavens,
Right.
hurl lightning bolts. He wants him to shoot arrows against his enemies,
Mm-hmm.
and then, of course, rescue me from these deep waters. It's very active. There's a real sense of urgency to this call for help. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that the imagery that he uses is so vivid. It really does convey just how serious these threats are that he's facing and his utter reliance on God to intervene. And as you said, it's not just a passive hope. It's an active cry for God to do something.
Right, right. And then something interesting happens. In verses 8 and 11, he starts talking about deceit.
Yeah.
And he mentions that his enemies, their mouths are full of lies.
Mm.
They swear to tell the truth, but they lie instead. So why do you think that is? Why is he emphasizing this idea of deceit, along with all these other physical threats that he's facing?
Well, I think it suggests that the danger isn't just physical.
Yeah.
There's also this relational and societal dimension to the danger he's facing. Trust is breaking down, lies are prevalent, and I think it's a picture of how these things can be incredibly destructive and damaging to a community.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, so then the tone starts to lift in verses 9 and 10. He talks about singing a new song and praising God for granting victory. And he even mentions, being rescued himself. David, it seems like there's a link here between past help and future praise. Like he's anticipating what's going to happen. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, when you see that new song language in the Psalms, it often signifies, a fresh experience of deliverance or a renewed covenant with God. And so I think it's a declaration of trust that's rooted in God's past faithfulness. Okay, yeah, I see that. And then he starts to, broaden things out even more. In verses 12 through 14, it goes from the personal to this picture of communal flourishing.
Right.
He's talking about healthy families, abundant harvests, secure borders. He says, no cries of alarm. Wow, what a vision. Like really comprehensive peace and prosperity. Why do you think he does that? Why that shift?
Well, I think it shows that the speaker's desire for wholeness extends beyond just his own personal safety. He's concerned for the well-being of the entire community.
Yeah.
And I think all these tangible blessings that he describes, they reflect this deep longing for stability and security for everyone.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we get to verse 15. And he says, joyful are those who live like this. Joyful indeed are those whose God is the Lord. So the joy that he's talking about isn't just about all the good stuff, right?
Right.
It's tied to something much deeper.
Yeah, exactly. The psalm is really defining true joy as a state of being that's connected to knowing God and living in relationship with him.
Right. Because ultimately all these blessings flow from him.
Yeah. So I think we've seen in just this short deep dive into Psalm 144, this powerful movement from personal vulnerability and cries for help to this beautiful picture of communal peace and this idea that joy is found in our relationship with God. There's just a lot going on here.
Yeah, and it really does make you stop and think. How did these ancient expressions of reliance, vulnerability, and hope resonate with us today?
Yeah.
What does it mean for us in the modern world to find our rock?
Great question. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.